Karen didn't just have my Jeep towed. She dismantled a federal sting because she thought it was too ugly for the neighborhood. That Jeep was surveillance gear on wheels, authorized by law enforcement, wired for audio, and bait for a cartel bust. But Karen called it visual pollution. I had it hauled off in the dead of night and left behind a traffic cone and a handwritten fine. The result? A months-long federal operation collapsed because one woman wanted prettier curb appeal. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sound that no homeowner ever wants to hear. A blaring alarm, the squeal of tires, and the sickening thump of something very heavy being dragged. Blue and red lights flickered like a nightclub for paranoid dads, bouncing across my bedroom ceiling. My first thought wasn't burglary, it was Karen, and I was right, again. I stumbled toward the window like a man trying to shake off anesthesia and was immediately greeted with what looked like the opening scene of a Hollywood drug bust, except the drugs had fled and the Jeep, the government-issued blacked-out beast of a vehicle that had been parked in front of my house per federal protocol, was nowhere to be seen. In its place, a single bright orange traffic cone and a handwritten note duct taped to the curb like it was fan mail from hell. Code violation. Vehicle removed by HOA. No signature, no explanation, just HOA authorities scrawled like it was the name of a new deity. I wasn't sure whether to scream, laugh, or check for hidden cameras. Let me be clear. This wasn't just any Jeep. This wasn't some jacked-up mall crawler with a fake winch and Punisher decals. This was a federal surveillance vehicle, wired, locked, and loaded for a sting operation that had taken months of planning. It had encrypted audio, remote-controlled cameras, and a GPS tag buried deeper than Karen's grasp of reality. The FBI had chosen it because, and I quote, no one would touch it. They clearly hadn't met our HOA president. Her name was Deborah Kingsley, but the entire neighborhood called her the clipboarding menace. To her, beauty meant beige. Lawns were to be manicured to military standards. Trash cans must never, under any circumstance, be visible from the street. And God forbid your vehicle look even slightly tactical. It might destabilize the entire block's property values. When she first laid eyes on my Jeep, her face twisted like she'd just bitten into a lemon rind soaked in diesel. That vehicle, she told me with absolute seriousness, looks like it came from a war zone. I smiled. That's because it did. She didn't laugh. She blinked, pursed her lips, and marched off muttering about aesthetic terrorism. What I didn't realize at the time was that Deborah wasn't just annoyed. She was planning something. See, HOA Karens don't act in anger. They act in bylaws. They collect grievances like trophies, catalog every technicality, and wait for the perfect moment to pounce. And apparently at 3:17 in the damn morning, Deborah had decided to execute her plan. Within 30 minutes of me calling it in, 2 unmarked SUVs pulled into my driveway like they were late to a hostage negotiation. Agent Rivas and Officer Maddox stepped out looking like they'd skipped coffee and gone straight to furious. I opened the door and just said one word, Karen. They both exhaled in unison, as if her name had been burned into some classified watch list. Maddox stepped closer. Tell me she didn't tow the Jeep. She didn't just tow it, I said, holding up the note like Exhibit A. She confiscated it. He closed his eyes. Rivas muttered something in Spanish that probably translated to, we're screwed. That's when it hit me. Karen, Deborah, hadn't just broken a rule. She had just walked straight into a felony, holding bolt cutters like a trophy. And somehow, I had to explain to 2 federal agents that a suburban HOA president had just torched an undercover sting because she thought my Jeep clashed with the hydrangeas. At exactly 3:17 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sound that no homeowner ever wants to hear, a blaring alarm, the squeal of tires and the sickening thump of something very heavy being dragged. Blue and red lights flickered like a nightclub for paranoid dads, bouncing across my bedroom ceiling. My first thought wasn't burglary, it was Karen, and I was right. Again, I stumbled toward the window like a man trying to shake off anesthesia and was immediately greeted with what looked like the opening scene of a Hollywood drug bust, except the drugs had fled and the Jeep, The government-issued, blacked-out beast of a vehicle that had been parked in front of my house per federal protocol was nowhere to be seen. In its place, a single bright orange traffic cone and a handwritten note duct taped to the curb like it was fan mail from hell. Code violation. Vehicle removed by HOA. No signature, no explanation, just HOA authority scrawled like it was the name of a new deity. I wasn't sure whether to scream, laugh, or check for hidden cameras. Let me be clear, this wasn't just any Jeep. This wasn't some jacked up mall crawler with a fake winch and Punisher decals. This was a federal surveillance vehicle, wired, locked, and loaded for a sting operation that had taken months of planning. It had encrypted audio, remote-controlled cameras, and a GPS tag buried deeper than Karen's grasp of reality. The FBI had chosen it because, and I quote, no one would touch it. They clearly hadn't met our HOA president. Her name was Deborah Kingsley, but the entire neighborhood called her the clipboarding menace. To her, beauty meant beige. Lawns were to be manicured to military standards. Trash cans must never, under any circumstance, be visible from the street. And God forbid your vehicle look even slightly tactical. It might destabilize the entire block's property values. When she first laid eyes on my Jeep, her face twisted like she'd just bitten into a lemon rind soaked in diesel. This vehicle, she told me with absolute seriousness, looks like it came from a war zone. I smiled. That's because it did. She didn't laugh. She blinked, pursed her lips, and marched off, muttering about aesthetic terrorism. What I didn't realize at the time was that Deborah wasn't just annoyed. She was planning something. See, HOA Karens don't act in anger. They act in bylaws. They collect grievances like trophies, catalog every technicality, and wait for the perfect moment to pounce. And apparently at 3:17 in the damn morning, Deborah had decided to execute her plan. Within 30 minutes of me calling it in, 2 unmarked SUVs pulled into my driveway like they were late to a hostage negotiation. Agent Rivas and Officer Maddox stepped out looking like they'd skipped coffee and gone straight to furious. I opened the door and just said one word, "Karen." They both exhaled in unison as if her name had been burned into some classified watch list. Maddox stepped closer. "Tell me she didn't tow the Jeep." "She didn't just tow it," I said, holding up the note like Exhibit A. "She confiscated it." He closed his eyes. Rivas muttered something in Spanish that probably translated to, "We're screwed." That's when it hit me, Karen. Sorry, Deborah hadn't just broken a rule. She had just walked straight into a felony holding bolt cutters like a trophy. And somehow I had to explain to 2 federal agents that a suburban HOA president had just torched an undercover sting because she thought my Jeep clashed with the hydrangeas. That Jeep Deborah hated so much, it wasn't just my ride. It was a mobile surveillance node, wired tighter than her weekly HOA agenda. A few months before moving to Willow Bend, I got a quiet knock from a friend in law enforcement, someone I'd worked with back when I still wore boots and dealt with people who didn't cry over mailbox colors. They were setting up a sting operation to catch a local drug distribution network using suburban homes as pass-throughs. Low profile, clean streets, boring people, the perfect cover for illegal shipments. And they needed a fixed surveillance post, one that looked intimidating enough to keep nosy neighbors at bay, but also wouldn't trigger suspicion from the people they were watching. My Jeep, with its tactical exterior and please don't talk to me vibe, was perfect. They outfitted it with encrypted cameras, two-way mics, motion sensors, and a GPS tracking system that fed back to an offsite server. Inside the glove box was a thumbprint-locked case containing all the recordings. On the outside, it looked like a rugged, slightly overkill personal vehicle. On the inside, it was basically a 4-wheel spy. The arrangement was simple. I was to leave the Jeep parked at a fixed angle in front of my home. Every 48 hours, I'd shift it slightly to stimulate use. I wasn't allowed to drive it unless they issued a directive. No one could enter it, not even me, unless there was an emergency. I added a heavy-duty wheel lock that made it obvious this wasn't some abandoned junker rusting into the pavement. It had a blinking LED on the dash, a printed decal that said under active maintenance, and a laminated note from the department tucked inside the windshield, all visible, all clear. To a rational person, it screamed, "Don't touch this." To Deborah Kingsley, it screamed, "Challenge accepted." Her first complaint, within 72 hours. Said the Jeep created a hostile aesthetic, whatever that means. And then she escalated to abandoned vehicle, even though I literally stepped out of it while holding groceries 5 minutes earlier. When that didn't work, she accused of psychological intimidation. Her words. I swear if she had her way, she'd find shadows for being too dramatic. I tried to explain gently that the vehicle was tied to official duties. I didn't go into detail, of course, need-to-know basis. She didn't need to know. But the more vague I was, the more obsessed she became. Karen logic. If you're being vague, clearly you're hiding something. And if you're hiding something, it's ugly. And if it's ugly, it's a violation. Then came the real warning sign. I caught her standing next to the Jeep one morning, squinting at it like it was a Rubik's Cube made of sin. She had a tape measure in one hand and a manila folder in the other. That folder, I would later learn, was full of printouts, photos of the Jeep at every angle, cross-referenced with what I assume was a homemade HOA guideline she invented in her sleep. It had tabs, color-coded tabs. Rick, my neighbor, leaned out and asked if she was opening a war crimes tribunal. She told him to mind his mulch. She was spiraling, and like most suburban tyrant, she wasn't going to rest until something was removed, destroyed, or buried in paperwork. And unfortunately, that something was my Jeep. The day Karen snapped, the sun was shining, birds were chirping, and my neighbor Rick had just set up his lawn chair like he was about to watch a NASCAR crash in slow motion, because in a way he was. Deborah Kingsley, our self-anointed sheriff of shrubs, was pacing in front of my house, gripping a pair of industrial-grade bolt cutters like she'd just looted him from a demolition site. She wasn't even pretending to be subtle anymore. She was in full suburban warlord mode, hair pulled back in a militant bun, clipboard tucked under one arm like it was a battle plan. I was out grabbing dog food. She knew that. She'd seen me leave. This wasn't a spontaneous concern for community safety. This was a scheduled act of HOA vigilantism. According to Rick's ring cam footage, because yes, of course he recorded it, Deborah took exactly 7 seconds to size up the lock, mutter, "I sore my ass," and snip through the steel like it was dental floss. Then, with a triumphant little nod to herself, she dialed a number and summoned a tow truck that looked like it escaped from a Craigslist ad titled, "We Haul Without Questions." No logos, no uniform, just a guy in a hoodie with a cigarette and an attitude. The kind of guy who's probably never asked, "Is this legal?" in his life. As they hooked up the Jeep, Karen turned to the camera, smiled, and said the words that would eventually make her a nationwide meme. "One less tank on my street." By the time I got home, the Jeep was gone. At first, I thought it had been stolen, until I noticed the orange cone standing proudly in its place like it had won a turf war. Taped to it, with flair only Karen could provide, was a handwritten violation slip. Section 12C4, vehicle must not undermine neighborhood appeal, remove per HOA authority, no phone number, no explanation, no chill. I stood there, holding a bag of dog food and trying to decide whether I was hallucinating or living inside a rejected episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. I went straight to her door, knocked, no answer, rang the bell, still nothing. 5 minutes later, I received a formal email with a subject line that read, "Neighborhood Improvement Notification." She actually used the word improvement. The message itself was a symphony of bureaucratic gaslighting. Per our guidelines, your vehicle has been relocated to reduce visual pollution and reinforce community cohesion. This woman stole federal surveillance equipment and described it like she'd moved a flower pot. I don't remember much after that moment except rage, disbelief, and the sudden realization that my name was now about to show up in a very unpleasant government file labeled Compromised Operation. I called the task force immediately. Officer Melendez picked up, and when I explained what had happened, there was a long-waited pause. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that your HOA president cut through a lock, hired a private tow company, and removed a vehicle that was actively recording targets for a narcotics investigation?" "Yes," I said. "And she left Tacoma." Melendez sighed like he'd just aged 5 years. I'll be there in 20 and get that footage from your neighbor. By the time he arrived, he wasn't alone. 2 other agents followed, all of them stone-faced. Rick handed over the ring clip like he was submitting a trophy, and I could see Melendez's jaw tighten as Karen's little tank comment played. This is obstruction, one agent muttered. At best. Another asked, where'd she send it? That's when we all looked at each other, because no one knew. It wasn't at any city impound, not on any lot. The Jeep had vanished. And when a surveillance vehicle wired to track criminals disappears off grid because of one woman's aesthetic preferences, something tells you this story isn't ending with a stern HOA email. It took less than 12 hours for the federal task force to go from mildly annoyed to DEFCON pissed. By the next morning, Agent Melendez texted me 5 words. We found the Jeep. Get dressed. No context, no warning, just pure bureaucratic dread packed into a sentence. I barely had time to throw on a hoodie before he pulled into my driveway in an unmarked SUV, his jaw clenched like he was chewing glass. The silence during the drive said more than any briefing ever could. We snaked through the back roads of Willow Bend, past the HOA maintenance shed, a kind of sad little prefab building no one ever paid attention to, and pulled up to a rusted chain-link gate hidden behind overgrown hedges. On the gate was a cheap master lock, already snapped open and swinging in the wind like it was trying to escape. Melendez didn't speak, he just pointed. Inside was what I can only describe as Karen's personal version of the Bermuda Triangle. A weed-choked lot with cracked pavement, tarps flapping in the breeze, and 4 vehicles dumped like forgotten corpses. My Jeep sat crooked near the back, scratched up, dirty, and missing its side mirror. The surveillance case inside had been opened and gutted, wires yanked out, like someone had tried to perform surgery with a crowbar. There were signs of forced entry on the glove box, dried mud jammed in the wheel wells, and enough fingerprints to build a new neighborhood registry. It looked like it had been dragged through a back alley and dumped here, like some criminal in a mafia movie who knew too much. This isn't a tow yard, Melendez muttered, kicking aside a broken cone. This is a damn car graveyard. There were other cars, too, vehicles with parking stickers ripped off, faded violation notes crumpled on windshields, and one sedan with an HOA flyer wedged under a windshield wiper like it was a final insult. This wasn't community enforcement. This was a rogue HOA chop shop, a suburban boot camp for abused vehicles. Then, like a scene ripped from a dark comedy, Karen herself appeared, heels clicking across gravel, phone in one hand, Starbucks cup in the other, wearing a fuchsia blazer like she was hosting a brunch instead of walking into a federal crime scene. Oh, good, she chirped. You found it? I was just about to notify you. Melendez didn't even blink. Ma'am, step away from the vehicle. Karen froze. Excuse me? You were interfering with an active federal investigation. You removed government property from an operation without authorization, without paperwork, without jurisdiction. Her response? A smirk. Well, maybe next time you won't leave tanks on my street. That thing looked abandoned. It had a lock, Melendez snapped, and a federal ID in the windshield. Oh, please, anyone could print that. I assumed it was cosplay. I watched her dig her heels in, literally and metaphorically, as she tried to defend herself with the verbal equivalent of a wet napkin. She even pulled out a laminated HOA manual like it was the Constitution. Per Article 14B, Section 9, I have the authority to remove unsightly vehicles. No, you don't, a voice said behind us. Another agent, holding a folder. You bypassed your board, used a non-licensed tow service, and stashed federal surveillance property behind a maintenance shed. That's not Article 14B. That's felony obstruction. Karen blinked, like this was her first inkling that things might not go her way. But it was the next sentence that really did it. When Melendez turned and said, you know what the best part is? We've got it all on camera. Because, oh yes, Rick's ring cam footage wasn't just evidence, it was art. And it was about to become very public. Friday night came like a bad sequel. The emergency HOA meeting was set for 6 p.m. sharp at the Willow Bend Community Center, but by 5:20, the parking lot was overflowing. People brought folding chairs, lemonade jugs, and in Rick's case, a lawn chair, a GoPro, and a cooler labeled Live, Fallout, Live. The energy was somewhere between courtroom drama and neighborhood tailgate party. Nobody was here to mediate. They came to watch Karen burn. She strutted in 15 minutes late, red blazer, pearls, and clipboard in hand, like she was about to present quarterly earnings instead of defend herself from felony charges. She nodded to the board members, who looked like they'd aged 5 years this week, then tapped the mic twice like she was warming up for TEDx OA. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, syrupy as a Southern grandma offering poison sweet tea. "I'd like to address the recent confusion involving the removal of a non-compliant vehicle from our streets." Someone snorted in the back. Karen smiled tighter. "As your HOA president, I take community standards very seriously. When I noticed an abandoned vehicle, large, aggressive in design with a chain on the wheel, I followed proper procedures to have it removed. I did this to preserve the aesthetic integrity of our neighborhood. I stood up. That abandoned vehicle was a surveillance truck for a federal task force." Hearing smile froze. "I was unaware of any covert activity," which is kind of the point of covert, I said. Rick, with timing only chaos gods could love, walked to the AV station and handed the IT guy a USB. "Run the tape," he whispered, grinning like he was about to show a blooper reel at a wedding. The lights dimmed. First, ring cam footage. Karen, bolt cutters in hand, slicing the wheel lock. That smug smile, her quote, "One less tank on my street." The tow truck, clearly off-brand, no city insignia, hooking the Jeep and hauling it away like it was an old mattress. Then came the screenshots. Karen's Facebook rant. Visual terrorism should be legal. Her comment in the HOA forum, "Sometimes you have to break the rules to protect the vibe." The one that really broke the crowd? That Jeep was prepping for war. "I saved our block." Silence, then shifting. Then someone whispered, "Oh my God." Karen's voice cracked just a little. "I believe I was misled by the vehicle's appearance. There was no official tag." "There was," said a calm, crisp voice from the back. Detective Sasha Lynn stepped forward, holding a folder thicker than Karen's ego. There was a tag and a government-issued case number and surveillance gear. "You tampered with federal equipment, used an unlicensed tow service, and failed to file any notice with your board." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Sasha continued. "The operation you compromised involved an active drug trafficking investigation. Your actions forced us to shut down the sting." A wave of whispers surged through the room. Greg, the board member who always looked like he was 2 HOA violations away from a breakdown, stood up and said, "I'd like to make a motion to suspend Deborah Kingsley from her duties pending legal review." Another member raised her hand. Seconded. A third muttered, "All in favor." The response was unanimous. And Karen blinked, stunned. "You can't do this. This is a power grab." "I built this HOA and you blew it up," I said. Then just when we thought it was over, she whipped out a manila envelope like it was a sword of Damocles and waved it triumphantly. "This is a cease and desist filed by my attorney against Mr. Jacobs in the Willaband PD for entrapment and emotional distress." Sasha took it, glanced once, and handed it back. "Your lawyer, Trent Maxwell?" "Yeah, he's already under investigation in 3 counties. Good luck with that." Karen looked around for support. Even her usual HOA lackeys stared at the floor like the linoleum had secrets. Rick leaned over and whispered to me, "Ding dong, the witch is cooked." But Karen, she wasn't done, not even close. And the internet was just getting started. It took less than 24 hours. Rick posted the ring cam footage to Reddit, caption, "HOA Karen cuts the lock on a federal Jeep. Guess what happens next?" By lunchtime, it was front page. 2 million views by sundown. By midnight, Karen's face was immortalized in meme format across TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. One creator edited her, quote, "One less tank on my street over Call of Duty gameplay." Another auto-tuned her HOA rant into a remix that slapped way harder than it should have. Someone photoshopped her face onto a Grand Theft Auto cover. Karen, Theft Auto Suburban Siege. Local news vans started camping near the community center like they were covering a hostage situation. Reporters asked if this was the first time an HOA had interfered with federal surveillance. I said, probably, but I wouldn't put money on it. Even the city council weighed in. One member tweeted, "Wild to think we almost let this woman regulate mailbox colors." Karen, in true Karen fashion, doubled down. 2 days after the meeting, she held an impromptu press conference outside the courthouse. She wore the same red blazer, now visibly wrinkled, and clutched a folder labeled Legal Truths. Standing beside her was her discount lawyer, Trent Maxwell. Looking like a failed game show host with greasy hair and a Bluetooth headset, Trent claimed Karen was a victim of government overreach, misinformation, and entrapment, and that her actions were motivated by love for the neighborhood. Someone in the crowd shouted, "You towed a Jeep?" Another added, "With bolt cutters?" The press conference made it to Late Night with Colton James, where the host joked, Karen didn't just break federal law, she broke the HOA fourth wall. But while the world laughed, the DA got serious. Formal charges were filed: obstruction, tampering with surveillance, illegal towing, property destruction, and misuse of community funds. Yep, turns out Karen had been paying her mystery tow company with HOA money without approval. Expense logs showed thousands in maintenance reimbursements, which apparently included towing fees, bolt cutter replacements, and her personal printer ink. The board was livid. Greg stepped in as interim president and immediately disbanded Karen's beloved violation committee. Neighbors literally applauded in the streets like we'd won a war. Meanwhile, Rick launched a website, HOAWatchdog.net, with all the footage, legal updates, and of course, merch. There were mugs with "One Less Tank," t-shirts that read "Visual Terrorism Survivor," and even tote bags with Karen's parking cone violation printed on them. They sold out in 2 days. The Jeep, meanwhile, became a local landmark. The cops returned it, scratched dusty, but intact. And someone spray painted a tiny crown over the dented fender. A GoFundMe started as a joke to it actually raised enough to cover repairs and give it a tactical matte black finish. It looked glorious. But beneath the memes and merch, something else was happening. The neighborhood changed. People talked more, laughed more, let their kids draw chalk art on the sidewalk without worrying about citations. Someone flew a rainbow flag off their porch. No complaints. Another installed flamingo lights. People high-fived him. It was like we'd all woken up from a HOA-induced coma. Willow Bend started feeling like, well, a community. Karen, on the other hand, vanished from sight. Her house went dark. Her lawyer stopped returning calls. The rumor mill said she was trying to sell quietly. Word was no one wanted to buy a house with "That's where Jeep Karen lived" attached to the listing. Meanwhile, we were just getting started, because if there's one thing the internet loves more than justice, it's justice with popcorn. And what came next? Oh, that was the real payoff. What happened on a Saturday morning? One of those annoyingly perfect suburban days where birds chirp a little too loud, coffee tastes suspiciously better, and you just know the universe is planning something. I was on my porch scrolling through Karen memes when the convoy rolled in. 3 black SUVs, 1 government sedan, and a pair of U.S. Marshals who looked like they were here to reboot CSI Suburbia. They knocked once on Karen's door, waited the legally mandated 30 seconds, then stepped back and nodded. Lots would pop the lock like it was a soda can. A few curious neighbors peeked out their windows. Others just walked outside with their coffee like it was HOA Christmas. Karen finally appeared, hair a mess, still in her wrinkled red blazer, clutching a folder like it was a magic scroll that might still save her. It didn't. The marshals cuffed her right there on the porch. No screaming, no denial, just the blank stare of a woman who still didn't fully grasp that she'd been arrested because she couldn't stand the color of a Jeep. And the wildest part, nobody clapped, nobody jeered. It was quiet. The kind of silence that hits when a long, stupid war finally ends. Detective Sasha Lynn swung by that afternoon, handed me a final printout of the charges: obstruction, tampering with federal equipment, unauthorized vehicle removal, misuse of HOA funds, operating an unlicensed impound facility, and suspected embezzlement. Honestly, the list read more like the back cover of a crime thriller than a case summary. But Karen's arrest was just part 1. The real collapse came later that week. After a state audit and about 17 resignations, the HOA board voted to dissolve entirely. That's right. The bylaws Karen worshiped like gospel were officially shredded. People celebrated like it was V-Day, mailboxes got painted bright blue, garden gnomes popped up overnight like mushrooms after rain. One guy built a literal flamingo army on his lawn. Nobody stopped him. In fact, someone brought snacks. As a thank you gesture, the neighborhood gifted me a custom steel sign for my curb, reserved for tactical eyesore. Even the mailman asked for a selfie with it. But the biggest surprise came the following weekend. Melendez and Sasha returned, this time in jeans and sunglasses, holding a fat set of keys and the deed to Karen's impound lot. Turns out the city had seized it, and the task force quietly bought it on behalf of the neighborhood, and they handed it to me. We figured the guy who got his Jeep jacked by Clipboard Warrior deserves to decide what gets parked here now, Sasha said. So, yeah, I now own the former illegal HOA vehicle graveyard. We turned it into a community garage. No fees, no permits, no petty violations, just tools, benches, and open access for anyone fixing up a car, a bike, or a bad week. To christen the place, the neighborhood organized the first annual tactical Jeep parade. Dozens of Jeeps rolled down Sycamore Lane, military, civilian, vintage, all shapes and sizes. Kids waved flags. Rick live streamed it all. People cried. And at the front of the line, my Jeep, now fully restored, sporting a sleek matte black coat, a new surveillance rig, and the phrase community watchdog stenciled across the hood. That Jeep used to be a violation. Now it's a monument. Karen, for her part, took a plea deal. No jail time, but she had to pay restitution, lost her right to serve on any board for the next 20 years, and sold her house at a loss. She left at night, no goodbyes, no flowers, just silence. And honestly, that was enough. The neighborhood's different now. No more HOA letters, no more passive-aggressive lawn warnings. We plant what we want, we talk to each other, we breathe, we live. And if you ever visit Willapa, you'll see a little metal sign in front of my driveway, and right above it, a plaque that says, in memory of the time one woman tried to fight a Jeep and lost to the entire internet. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge. Sometimes it rolls on four wheels. So what's the lesson here? Easy. Don't steal Jeeps, especially not tactical, surveillance-wired, federally authorized, parked by a guy with a ring cam and neighbors who own coolers labeled evidence. But deeper than that, this story's proof that sometimes the real threat to a community isn't crime, it's control. Not every battle is fought with sirens and subpoenas. Some start with a parking cone, a clipboard, and one person who takes their HOA title way too seriously. But when people stand together, even over something as ridiculous as a Jeep, systems crack. And sometimes from those cracks, you get a garage full of wrenches, a block party, and a tactical parade that makes CNN. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. If you laughed, gasped, or whispered, "Why away," at least once, go ahead and smash that like, subscribe, and drop your wildest HOA story in the comments. Till next time, keep your Jeeps locked and your Karens in check.